the biggest challenges for me is this whole idea of self-worth, self-belief, um, self self-love even. And I don't think that these are unbiblical ideas. We just have to have a different perspective on them. Probably the biggest regret in my life to date would be the opportunities that I've missed out on because I've lived in sort of a fear, not having that confidence in myself, whereas probably what we should or how we should think about it is having confidence that God is able to work through us.
All right. Welcome everyone to episode 4, and we have George here from Adelaide, Australia, who will be talking to us on this podcast of ValleyToVictory. And let's just get cracking with a few questions about you. Who are you? What are you doing? Just tell us a bit about what you're up to these days.
Yeah. G'day, Chris. G'day, everyone. Yeah, like Chris said, my name's George. I'm from and live in Australia, in Adelaide. I'm a Christadelphian and go to the Enfield meeting. I'm just sitting outside in a very Aussie setting with the sun out the back and the birds chirping away. So it's pretty nice to be out in nature. It's still just coming toward the back end of summer. So yeah, that's sort of me personally. I'm a urban planner as far as job goes. Keeps things pretty interesting. My hobbies and interests are in socializing, playing sports, landscape design in general, those sorts of things. And yeah, really just being around fellow like-minded brothers and sisters and young people and yeah, getting excited about God's word and being on podcasts. And I've just started a podcast as well. And I'm sure we'll get into that at a later stage. But yeah, that's sort of a new project I've got on the go as well. So yeah, it's all happening.
So cool. I definitely like the birds in the background, and that definitely adds to the Aussie vibe. Thank you for sharing that. And yes, let's get into the podcast later on. But let's start at the beginning. Where did you start? What childhood memories, what childhood events kind of affected your belief? And let's go to when you were a child and you were like, hey, I go to the meeting, but what was the motivation to then keep going?
Yeah. You talk about a child. I would say I was probably a little bit older when I was solidly convicted about the truth and making it a way of life for myself. I was brought up in the Christadelphian church. My parents and grandparents, and probably for a few generations, have been Christadelphians, so I've been very much entrenched in it from a young age. I'm the third of 4 siblings, got a couple of older brothers who've been real mentors for me, parents who are together and love the truth and are great examples in themselves, and a younger sister as well. So I would say, I mean, I got baptized at 19, which felt late. For those who have been to Adelaide or know Adelaide, um, with blessings like the school and with large combined youth groups and whatever else, there is a certain amount of peer pressure to sort of follow a certain direction in life. So I got baptized at 19, but like I say, I think growing up, it was never out of conviction. In all honesty, I think it was expected. I had a belief. I believed in God. I feel like I have faith, but I think only in hindsight you realize that, hey, I got baptized and I was really just doing what was expected. A lot of my friends were doing it at the same time. I went through first principles with my dad, who was really good for that. And then I just, everyone who does first principles, of course, gets baptized at the end of it. And so I found that to be the natural progression. But it's only really been, I would honestly have to say within the last couple of years where I've really made it personal for myself. And yeah, that's been through living experiences and sort of the ups and downs of life, which I know that your podcast looks at. And yeah, that's what builds real conviction in my life, to be honest. And I'm sure in the lives of lots of your other guests.
Yeah, so you're touching on a point that's really powerful. And I think baptism at the end of the day is just saying, okay, I want to start this journey, and it's very much a starting point. And I think your relationship with God and Jesus does change over time. And I feel like this might be a good time to go into those valleys. Are there any times in your life where you're like, wow, this was hard, a specific moment that you want to share, a struggle where you felt really low?
Yeah, there's been a couple. I mean, I'm in my 30s now, and sort of speaking as a fool, I've had some life experiences. I mean, to be honest, it's been pretty sheltered. Sort of went to Sunday school growing up, went to Heritage College that some people might know about, which is a Christadelphian school. Got baptized at 19, sort of followed the normal progression. Got pretty involved in my ecclesia, was on youth group committees and on gospel committees and those sorts of things. So I think as a general life experience, I've probably never experienced these big crazy moments that I would say, look, this was defining for me until, again, like I say, the last couple of years. It's pretty easy to go through life when, you live in a place like, Germany or the UK or Australia. You're very used to life being easy and comfortable and having everything at your fingertips for a lot of us anyway. And in some respects, I've realized over time that adds that there is a pressure on your faith to say no, this life is great, I have everything that I want, why could I want any more? Why am I living the truth? These sorts of things. Why do I want the kingdom to come back? I don't experience hardship or injustice or famine or poverty or all these sorts of things. So I think sometimes having too much can also be a bit of a weight on our faith as well. But when I talking about probably some of the low points in my life, there's definitely been a few over the years that are sort of hard to talk about. So I probably won't go into too much detail, but relationships has probably been a big one for me. Um, I'm 30. I am single, and there are definitely positives to that. A lot of my friend group is married, and that's awesome, and starting to have kids and those sorts of things. So that is something that um, has been a challenge for me, and I'm sure a challenge for a lot of other single people out there. But I would say the biggest challenges for me, and I'm sure these are sort of things that we all struggle with time to time, is this whole idea of self-worth, self-belief, um, self self-love even.
Mm.
And I'll sort of explain a bit what I mean by that, because I don't think that these are unbiblical ideas. We just have to have a different perspective on them. And I would say, I'm a relatively emotional person, probably a bit of a deep thinker, probably an overthinker as well. So these things, when I do go through trials and when I do make mistakes in my life, I tend to really get bogged down in them, to be completely honest with you. I've always found myself on the other end, which is awesome, and God's obviously directed me through them as well. But yeah, I tend to, when things go wrong in my life, I do tend to ruminate over them, but I always have the trust that God's there at the end. But I think it is that self-worth piece a little bit that I've probably struggled with throughout my life, and sort of not always putting my best foot forward, not always putting myself out there. And I know probably the biggest regret in my life to date would be the opportunities that I've missed out on, because I've lived in sort of a fear, not having that confidence in myself. Whereas probably what we should, or how we should think about it, is having confidence that God is able to work through us. So that's what I would say has been it for me. I've probably got a few experiences over the time, even with job situations, what I've wanted to study, how committed I've been to certain things, and yeah, you learn even communication skills and learning to speak the truth in love and these sorts of things. They have really impacted my relationships with people. And I would say that that's the way God has taught me over my life. The peaks are for God to teach us lessons. And I think He's taught me through the relationships that, I've burnt or that I've struggled with. But I've learnt the greatest lessons from as well, and how to shift my focus from self, the self-worth, the self-love, which are important to a degree, but also saying, look, it's God working in me. And the quote that I really love, from just sort of thinking about the questions that you put to me earlier, 2 Corinthians chapter 4, I think is awesome. Just reading from verse 5 out of the King James Version. We are troubled on every side, yet not distressed. We are perplexed, but not in despair. Persecuted, but not forsaken. Cast down, but not destroyed.
Mm.
And for me, I've always realized, and the Proverbs talk about, making mistakes. I don't count myself as a righteous person. Wouldn't call myself a righteous person, but there is that proverb that talks about a righteous man that falls 7 times gets back up. And those moments where I have been in those valleys, I've always been lifted out of them by realizing that it's about God and not myself. Realizing that he calls it here earthen vessels. We have this treasure in earthen vessels, and what I read into that is that the things that matter aren't the external. And I would say that I'm a very sort of outward focused person, and I've probably become to realize that's all it is. The outward appearance, the strength, the demeanor, the whatever else of the world really doesn't compare to what is the real power in our lives, which is the internal. And that's something I've had to learn a lot along the way as well. So that's what it would be for me.
Thank you so much for sharing this. I think it's a super important topic to, especially for men, to be open about emotions. Often it's cast aside. People say, oh, yeah, well, be the man, don't talk about that, don't cry, those kind of things. And it's super important that we get to be open and share that, yes, it's difficult to live this life. It's also difficult with self-worth. And you say you missed opportunities. I can relate to that as well. I've also made decisions and life gone through problems where I'm like, well, what am I doing here? Why am I here? What has God got to plan with me? But I feel like often when you get to look back on these valleys, you can see how God kind of like was holding your hand, guiding you up into the next mountain. And so I think this is really powerful, and that those verses that you shared are just so true, because God provides a way out, and it is really everything in this life is like, I always call it a prep, like a boot camp kind of thing for the kingdom ahead. So I feel like you hit the nail on the head, and that's exactly what this is all about. Like, we have to be able to share our struggles, to go through them together, and also work through together. So I think you shared that it was a hard time, it was a rough time, and you've gone through hard times as well. So what would you say has helped you most in those situations when you go through these times when you are low? You mentioned that Bible verse, but maybe you can just be a bit more specific on strategies, what helped you to go through those valleys.
Yeah, I think the big one for me has always been, I'm very much a people person, which is why I would say the things that have impacted me the most, sort of the valleys, have always been about my relationships with other people. Because for me, people and socializing and building relationships, is a bit of a strength of mine. So when they don't work, or I feel that, I'm not putting my best foot forward in them, or um, I'm not able to sort of guide relationships in a spiritual way, or whatever the situation may be, anything that sort of impacts my relationships is big for me, because I'm very much a people orientated person. And this is also important when, I guess, getting out of these valleys as well, is people for me as well. And I think it should be as well, because you've spoken about mental health earlier and those sorts of things, and it's well researched that chatting to other people and finding strategies is a way that does help. It is one method. It shouldn't be the whole method, because I think at the end of the day, mental health is to get out of mental health situations, unless they're sort of chronic and clinical. The best way to sometimes get out of them is just to make a choice, is just to say, I don't like this feeling. I don't like being in this situation. I'm making a choice to do differently. So I don't think it's just chatting to people, but for me, one of the biggest things was chatting to people, having mentors, having those relationships that you built over a long period of time, that when difficult times come, you can fall back on those relationships, and you build such a relationship where you can be vulnerable with them. You can share how you're feeling. to a degree. So I definitely think having the right people around you and cultivating the right relationships where you can have that trust, where you can express yourself at quite a deep level. Like, I don't think you should tell them necessarily everything, but at least people are willing to share what you're going through and to provide advice, especially if they're older. And I think it's, Jesus says, take my burden upon you and learn from me. And I think this is also something that we can be doing in our own lives as well. Yes, we do need to cast our burdens on Christ, and First Peter 5 talks about casting our burdens on God. But people, and not to sort of burden people too much as well, because they're also human as well. But it is a Christ-like attitude, I think, to help people through their burdens and to sometimes take them on and to chat through them with people as well, in a sort of a loving and a Christ-like way. So for me, it's been having mentors and having good people around me, having an ecclesia that's vibrant, and that's happy. Just being involved, just getting back out there, just being amongst other young people is a huge one. I say young people. I'm in my 30s now, but
You're young.
that's it's still
You
still
could.
still good to get out and have those opportunities, even if it's just playing sport. Like, it doesn't need to be, all right, let's go sit around and read all three readings. It's let's go play a game of pickup basketball. Let's go kick the footy at the park. Those sorts of things. Let's go camping, and in the end, let's go play a round of golf. And at the end of the day, you end up getting to the heart of it, which is, we're all struggling. You all feel like you know, there are things going on, and yet you can be there for each other, even if, the mode has been through sport or going for a run or whatever the case may be. So that's probably the first thing that comes to mind for me, for sure.
So true. I think you touch on relationships and that they are your struggle, but also they are the ones that lift you out of these valleys. And you also talked about mentorship. Is there any person, any certain people, you don't have to name names, but like someone in your life who you were like, wow, this person really helped me out of that struggle? And what were their characteristics like? Like how were they like maybe a little bit like Jesus?
Yeah, no, that's correct. I would definitely have a mentor, and probably what makes it easier is that um, he's a family member, and he lives quite close to me as well. I feel like I can chat to him about anything. He's probably on the emotional side as well, so we sort of understand where we're coming from a lot. So it's always been easy to literally just drop around there without a phone call, just dropping around and say, hey, look, I'm struggling with this, and him being able to help. And that's been fantastic. So it's been easy to do. And also his words have always been super encouraging. The way that he's like Christ to me is that he's always challenged the way that things have been done, and not necessarily in a bad way, but said, understand we've always done it like this, but have you thought about this? And I think that's what Christ is all about. You look at the Sermon on the Mount, and he says, it's been said of old times, so this is the way we've always done it. But I say unto you this, you know, that's sort of the feeling that I've had with him, and just the passion and the compassion that comes with that as well. And I think that's a really important attribute to have, especially when somebody's going through a difficult time, is to have that compassion. I think that's key. For me, I have purposefully selected a couple of mentors in my life, to be honest with you. And that's because they're good for different things. I go to my dad for, the real deep wisdom. I go to another family member for, and my dad would be more on the conservative side, I would say. And I have other family members and other people in my life that I can go to specific moments and for specific things that I'm going through. And they all have slightly different mindsets. And when, trying to collate advice and wisdom in my mind, I try and find a bit of a middle ground. And that does include chatting to people from, I guess, every aspect of the spectrum, from on the conservative to the more liberal side, and trying to find common themes and commonalities between them that can sort of help me, because everyone comes from a slightly different perspective, and I think it's good to respect the different perspectives, but also be able to make up your own mind. The Bible talks about being convinced in your own mind about what you believe in, and at the end of the day, I think with a lot of the issues we go through, you have to be convinced. People can only take you so far. People can only tell you so much. People can only help so much. At the end of the day, it comes down to your relationship with God and Christ that is going to be the difference, I believe.
Yeah, you say how it's so important to have a mentor, and I think I totally agree. Different aspects of life require mentorship of different types. Is there any tips or advice you'd give to people who are like keen to find out, how do I find a mentor? What are the steps I need to take? Do I just ask, or is there something else required of me? How would you say I should go about, for example, if I'm looking for a mentor in a certain aspect, like say my faith?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I think your main mentor, it's about finding somebody who's very approachable and somebody who might even be similar to you in a lot of ways, because it can be really hard, especially if you're going through something, to walk up to somebody and say, hey, look, I'm struggling with this. So first and foremost, I'd find a mentor that you're comfortable with, because you're on the same page with a lot of things. About if you want sort of that first go-to mentor, I think it's really important to find somebody who you've built that trust with, you've got that easy connection with, and even somebody that actually thinks along similar lines to you, because they can empathize with you and they can have probably a little bit more compassion's probably not quite the right word, but they can more easily empathize with what you're going through if you do chat to somebody who you do share some common characteristics with. Then I've got two older brothers, and they're both really different. I'm probably far more similar to one than the other, but I still get plenty of wisdom from both of them. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, it just comes down to how easy is it to have a deep and meaningful conversation with this person, because it can be so hard to reach out, especially when you're struggling. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. So at the end of the day, I always feel like for me, when I get to talk to someone and I say, okay, look, this is what I struggle with, you get vulnerable, you say these are my struggles, then it's often easier for the other person to then also open up and share what they're going through. And as a mentor or a mentee, it's both, it goes both ways. While you receive benefits from being a mentor and also being mentored. So I feel like it's a two-way system that God has given us from the beginning. Man and woman were two, right? It was not good that man was alone. So there's always been this aspect of community, and to reach out to people who are similar, who can really help you on that journey, who can get you out of that valley is really very powerful. Thank you so much for sharing. I think let's have a bit of a thought and a bit of a chat about how you connect with God. How is your relationship, and how would you go about transforming that, and how do you talk to God in a daily way and you connect with Him? Is there anything you'd like to share, or that you feel like is very powerful and that works for you?
Yeah. I, I, it probably all came out of a talk by a brother from New Zealand, brother David Bailey. He did a series on prayer, which is really worth listening to. He starts it off though with saying that, excuse me, there are so many different words that translate as prayer in the Bible. And I found that, and he goes on to explain that prayer and communication with God can take so many different forms. And as soon as I realized that, prayer isn't just, I need to go sit down somewhere, I need to close my eyes, I need to open a certain way, I need to close a certain way, it opened my eyes to what a relationship is actually all about. It's just talking, it's just constant communication. And I think you do need to find times throughout your day where you can be in solitude with God. But I think it's like anything, that the more it's like a relationship with a person. The more of a habit that you make, the deeper that you can go. And this is the same with friendships and relationships and whatever else. When you're sort of back on track with prayer again and it's becoming a consistent thing in your life, you'll pray a certain way, and you'll leave certain things out because you're like, that's too early to share that, or that's being too vulnerable. It can be the same with God as well. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but God does want you to share everything with him. And I think that's such a unique relationship to have. It's almost transcends, and it should transcend every human relationship that we have. But it's almost like with God, there's no limits to what you can chat to him about. And in fact, he wants to hear that. He doesn't want any closed doors in your life. And when I've started looking at prayer more like that, like an actual relationship, as opposed to, praying 3 times a day, praying for meals in a certain way, that's changed my relationship with God. And even, my first prayer throughout the day, which is when I'm on my way to work, I've stopped sort of closing that prayer with amen. I would sort of say, be with me throughout the day, but I won't say amen in a prayer until the end of my day. So it feels, and this is once again, it's an idea heard from the talk. It shows that you're in constant communication with God throughout the day. It's almost
Yeah.
this open-ended prayer that you have. So I think that's really important. What I also, and this is sort of something that I've started to get into my life as a habit of late, and it's become non-negotiable. So as soon as I'm ready for bed, I'll always make sure that I get outside, put a rug on the grass, and just stare up at the stars. And what I'll do is I'll go through one of the readings for the day, and I'll try and find a comment from that I can share. So there's some WhatsApp chats out there that are getting messages about the readings at about 11:45 at night sometimes, which is interesting. Not just having a surface level reading of whatever you might be reading at the time, but having a depth in your reading to the point where you can draw some really good practical lessons from that as well. So prayer and reading God's word just go hand in hand, and you can't have one without you really can't have one without the other. It's the two aspects of that relationship. And I'd say my prayer life is quite good. I've made it a really good habit. My Bible reading probably not so strong, but obviously looking to keep building on that. Obviously we're all learning and we're all
Of course.
on different journeys, so it's different for everyone as to where they are with their relationship with God.
I love the image of putting out a rug, looking at the stars, and really connecting with God, because that is one of the best memories I have of being in Australia when we went out to that camp, like 3 hours into the outback in
Oh,
your...
Glenlock.
Yeah, exactly. No,
Yeah.
no, sorry, not Glenlock, another camp. I can't remember. It was a youth camp, and we were out
Yeah.
in the stars, and it was just so amazing to be in your little tent sleeping bag thing. Forgot the names. Yeah.
Swag.
Anyway, swag, that's the word. Being in a swag, just opening the zipper, looking at the stars.
Chris the Jolly Swag Man.
Honestly, that was such an amazing experience, and it stayed with me a very long time. And I feel like when we get to experience nature, when I have personally go up in the mountains, go hiking in the Alps, and see God's nature and how He's calm. When in our head it seems like everything is extremely loud, that is really powerful. And the fact that you've been able to establish that prayer life. I love the fact that your whole day is one constant prayer. That is really inspiring and really encouraging. I think everyone listening to this can be uplifted in that way. And I honestly, reading the Bible is also hard, and I feel it's okay to have struggles, to still be working on things, and God works through your life. And this, I always think like it's a roller coaster. Like you start maybe at the top, then you go down, and it's always a bit of a up and down. At the end of the day, God will help you through, and it's really powerful to have this connection on this journey. Maybe you could touch and talk about your experience, especially with your relationship with Jesus, because I think that is a really powerful one, a really important one. And for me, Jesus is such an important character that lived the life, who went to the cross and also is now in heaven, preparing the kingdom. Yeah, just share your thoughts on that. I think It'll be really beneficial to others as well.
Yeah, look, I don't know how helpful I'm gonna be on this. It's always been an interesting one, and being a Christadelphian, I do feel, and this is from experience, just experiences being a brother in an ecclesia, is that we do tend to throw the baby out with the bathwater a little bit when it comes to our relationship with Jesus Christ. I think when the Christadelphian church was formed, and then over the years. And I'm listening to Brother John Martin's Life of Christ at the moment, and he talks about the relationship that we should have with Jesus Christ in our lives as well. And he was of the opinion that, yeah, we don't place as much emphasis on our relationship with Christ. So it is an interesting one, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it as well. For me, it's always been a little bit confusing, and I've sort of tried to work through it. Brother John Launchbury, I heard some great talks that he did, which looked at how, I guess the rituals and the way that we speak as Christadelphians and what that actually means. And it was very much around our relationship with Jesus Christ and what sort of relationship we should have with Jesus Christ. But I think, and this is where the other churches come in as well, and where we do, again, throw the baby out with the bathwater, is this idea of the Trinity and the actual relationship that our Lord and his Father God have is far more connected than we think, and sometimes the way that we've been conditioned. So I think it's really interesting. I try and acknowledge Jesus, my Lord, in all my prayers, and tend to visualize him, as Revelation 1 and 2 talk about him sort of walking amongst the ecclesias in that way. Like, it's a very personal thing for him. It's his bride. He's very much aware and building a relationship with the members there. But I think it always comes back to this. I mean, there's so much depth to the parables. I think they're some of the greatest learning methods of teaching that Jesus sort of ever talks about. And where I think it's Matthew 25:26, the sheep and the goats, and those who say, "Oh, Lord, Lord, we knew you, we did all these things in your name." And he says, "I never knew you, you workers of iniquity." Um, it's big, and what I get, our relationship with Christ is seen in the way in which we interact with others as well.
Mm.
And he says, "Because you've done it unto the least of these, my brethren, you've done it unto me," which means when I see that, it tells me that people have an attitude that is non-discriminatory. It's just their way of life. It's they've found their purpose. They've found their why. Simon Sinek would say they treat everyone the same. That there's no hierarchy in their mind. They treat everyone the same because that's what Christ did. They take the same approach to every person. And Christ says, the fact that you've had this attitude to everyone you've come in contact with, that way you're not just doing the things for Christ for show. You're actually doing them because that's who you are. Because, why then would you do it for somebody who can't either reciprocate that, or when people see that, they're like, why would you be doing that for that person, as our human minds tend to think. So I think when we understand the love that Christ had for us, the New Testament talks about before we were born, Christ died for sinners, and understanding what he went through and what God went through as well on our behalf, that is the first step in our relationship with Christ. And then that gets outworked in the way in which we interact with others and are Christ to others. But yeah, like I say, my relationship with Christ, it's almost easy to talk about our relationship with God, because it's very much, you do your readings and you pray and you've got that real connection with God specifically. But it's something my relationship with Christ is something that I'm still very much working on, because I know in myself that, I don't treat everyone the same. And I think that's a really good litmus test as to what our relationship with Christ is like too. So it's a work in progress, Chris, to be honest, at the end of the day.
And that's totally fine. That is what I've experienced as well. So for me, I've never really thought about it much until the last 3-4 years. And I must say, also my wife, Bron, she's also challenged me in a positive way, just thinking about that relationship. And I feel like for me, it's often just a conversation with Jesus when you're going through a hard time, because he was so human. Now he's made immortal, but he went through every temptation that we went through, and that Jesus is like that perfect example, but still approachable. Like sometimes I feel like God is so great, so big, that it can be hard for like my little problem with a relationship or my little problem with something at work. It seemed almost like, well, like I have to bother God with that. But like if you get to talk to Jesus in a way that has helped me to be honest with him, and also help me feel heard, when obviously God also answers our prayer. But Jesus as that mediator, I always see him like sometimes there's a need for a translator to God, because yeah, Jesus is that bridge, like Moses was the mediator or the intercessor for the people of Israel, for God's word. So I see him as that person who has gone through it all, has struggled, but also has overcome, and that is a fantastic image to have in the back of our minds, my mind, to just see that Jesus is there and he's willing to help every step of the way. As you say, he's going through, he's helping us along this way, going through the different ecclesias or the churches. So that is fantastic. Thanks for sharing this as well. Maybe you can share a few more thoughts on how your faith with God, how your relationship then also with Christ has helped you form decisions. Because often in life, we are at crossroads, and it just seems like human solutions are everywhere. But to decide the right way, to decide what God wants, is difficult. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I there's an idea that's always stuck in my brain about the essence of what faith is, and that is doing what we can do in faith and leaving what we can't do up to God. And what I mean by that is we are to a degree responsible for our own walk in the truth. It can't all be left up to somebody else. It can't all be left up to God, because it's a walk. I think everyone's walk in faith is very personal and should be very personal with God. It's a walk together with Christ, with God. I think it's very much a relationship, and that's the way that we should see it. It shouldn't be, leaving it all up to God. Philippians talks about, outworking our salvation. So we do very much still have a responsibility in our own salvation as well. And where this comes back to making decisions is we still need to act. We still need to act. But every action that we take should be with the understanding that wherever this action takes us, that we trust it's the right path, and that when things get difficult and complicated, that God can start to intervene in our lives and work in our lives as well. Yeah, it's a really interesting one, because I think at the end of the day that the majority of the decisions that we make throughout a day are almost done unconsciously. So God, I would say, as far as the decisions that I make in a day, a very small minority of them would include God in them, because when you're at work, or just doing a daily habit that you would, a lot of the decisions in life we take are sort of done axiomatically, and almost not without thinking, in the sense that we don't think about them, but we've got them so down packed that
Yeah.
we we don't include God in them. A really interesting or a fantastic example of this is where David, he fights heaps of wars, and we barely hear of any of the wars that David fights where he approaches God in prayer before them. But I think that he approached God in prayer before just about everything he did. But there's a
Yeah.
particular example, where he says to God, "Shall I go up and fight against the Philistine?" And we almost take it for granted that, yes, God wants him to go up and attack the Philistines, and not only attack the Philistines, but also that God would save the people and God would give them the victory and whatever else. I think when we read the Bible and we look through the Judges and through David and through so many examples, we assume that God is going to be with them. And I think that example gives us a little bit of an insight into the fact that prayer is essential before everything, before the majority of things that we do as well. And I think that that's a really just an incredible little insight before that. But I also, the Bible also gives us so many answers. It's the Proverbs and the Ecclesiastes that are almost guiding lights as well. And this is often where we get our answer from. Because there's so many practical examples of what people do in their common lives and what sort of an outcome that has too. So I think when we act with wisdom, we see the outcomes and we're anticipating what can happen in our lives, but also always at the end of the day, understanding that, God will bless their work if it's in line with his will. And I think that's what we've always got to remember.
Yeah, that's true. God will help us through life, and as you say, not every decision is with God in mind at the end of the day. But if He is at our center, and if we keep Him in our hearts, then I think every decision we made with the right attitude will be a decision that is guided by God. Maybe a few more thoughts about how your vision of the kingdom, like how do you picture it, and how does that kind of help your everyday, also touching on those decisions, but how does it help you get through the day that you can then picture the kingdom that is hopefully not very far around the corner?
That's a fantastic question, Chris, because I think that's core to our motivation. And I think it's something that we don't do often enough. When I do think about it, which, like I say, probably isn't as much as I should, it is at the end of the day about bringing people in a way that we can do so without fear. Fear is something that I've very much struggled in my life and probably impacted, the way that I preach and in the way that I interact with certain people. But this idea, and I picks it up, they shall mount up with wings as eagles. They'll be, we'll be immortal. We'll have unlimited energy. Having, this fearless ability to be able to bring people closer to God. I mean, the world's going to be in turmoil. You know, there's going to be signs in diverse places. There's going to be earthquakes in diverse places. So no one's going to remain unaffected by the coming of Christ. Excuse me. So I think going to a world where nobody will have the answers and fearlessly being able to go up to people and say, Jesus has come back to the earth. This is
Yeah,
how, this is who he is. I think that's my vision of the kingdom.
that is
Excuse me.
fantastic. Yeah, no worries. That is really fantastic because if you have that vision and you can picture this concrete fact or vision, some moment that will happen in the future to just help you get going every day. And then that'll also help you overcome that fear and help us overcome the fear of talking to people. Because we know, what do we have to lose in the end? Nothing really. It's just our own mind trying to trick us that, oh, people will judge us. What's the worst that can happen, right? That someone
Exactly.
says, no, I'm not interested, and then you just move on. This is the right time to ask you if you have anything you want to share with listeners who are going through hard times, any steps for young Christians to get out of the valley.
Yeah, I think this is what's gotten me out of the most difficult moments in my life, and that is knowing that I can tell God anything. So saying, for example, God, I want to believe, I just can't believe at the moment. I can't believe in you. I can't believe in what you're doing in my life. I want to. Please, please direct my life. Please open my eyes to the things that you're doing in my life to help me believe. Because I think at the end of the day, most people want to believe in God who are raised there because of the blessings of the truth and of the coming kingdom and all the things that are associated with believing and trusting in God. I think the majority of people want to. And when we're in our deepest, darkest moments, especially when things don't go our way, it's very easy to stop trusting in God. And even I've asked myself, and you've sounds like you've learned quite a bit in just very recent times as well. But what does believing in God actually mean? Do I just believe in Him when things are going right, or am I believing Him in all aspects of life? So I think as a young person, it would be to say a simple prayer like, God, right now I don't believe, help thou my unbelief, or words to that effect. And there shouldn't be any, I don't believe, personally, and people might have other thoughts on this, but my personal belief is that with God, there should be nothing off the table. You should tell him absolutely everything. And that can be cathartic to a degree as well. But if you truly want a relationship with God, God is going to answer your prayers. And so I was praying like that day after day when I was thinking about it, because I'm like, I want to have a relationship with you, God, more than anything else. But right now, I'm not in a position where I believe in you and what you're doing in my life. And over a period of about a week or two, I started to notice small things. Because I was praying for God to help my unbelief, I started to see him respond in very small ways. Like I would get a message from somebody out of the blue, I'd get a call from somebody out of the blue, I'd get an invite to go somewhere out of the blue, I'd get the opportunity to um, be involved in something called share an experience with somebody, which helps as well.
Yeah.
So don't just pray to God saying, help down my unbelief. Also look for the ways that God is responding to that, because this is probably something that's happened to me in the last 12 months. That's without a doubt made me believe in God with all my heart, is that I had a week or two where all I could pray was help down my unbelief. And then I would see little things happen. And I knew that God was real in my life because he was answering my prayer. And I believed that God wanted me to believe in him because he was showing me small little ways in which my faith was being restored. With young people, I think we live in fear. I think our society is very anxious or avoidant. It can be a bit of both. We're very fearful,
Mm.
but irrespective of what your relationship is like with the particular church you're a part of, or your friends or your family, getting back to God, the other things will flow from that. And I think in our society, when we're told to say certain things, we're told to look certain ways, we're told to believe certain things, pouring out your heart to God and saying it out loud. Don't say it in your head. Go to a place or in your car, go to a place where you can say your prayer out loud. Leave nothing off the table. There is nothing more faith inspiring than that. So yeah, that's what I would say.
That was fantastic. I really got a lot of good energy and help from what you've said so far. And I want to thank you for your time on here. Is there anything you'd like to say to people who want to connect with you? How can listeners best connect with you? You mentioned the podcast, so this is your chance to plug it, and I'll link it below.
Yeah, no worries. I might have to get back to you about that. We're not quite on iTunes at this stage, but that's a work in progress. We're still refining our first episode that we recorded, but it is called Faith Works. I also have an email. I'm happy to send that to you or WhatsApp number or whatever, and you can add that wherever if that helps. On Instagram, all those sorts of things as well. But yeah, if you a bit of sort of cross support from the podcasts. But yeah, no, I'll send you the podcast links and details, and yeah, if you want to have a squiz about that, like Chris, we get visiting speakers talking about their sort of their pet subjects and how that's inspired their faith, and we have a few different segments looking at different aspects of faith. So yeah, I'm happy to leave my details with you. And yeah, the podcast there is called Faith Works, and it'll be up on Apple Podcasts any minute. So look out for that. Thanks, Chris.
Cool. Thank you so much for coming on. Thanks for your wisdom and your words. I feel like they've inspired me, they've encouraged me, and they'll inspire many others. So thanks again, and thanks to everyone who's been listening so far. You are great, and it's great to have you on here. Have a good week and see you next week.